Hi, my name is Frank Washkuch. I'm the news editor of PRWeek, and I'm here with Jefrey Pollock. He is the president of Global Strategy Group. Jeff, welcome.
Thank you.
So a lot of people don't really understand the connection between polling, research and data, and public affairs and public relations. What's the bridge?
Well, for many people, research and polling is the backbone because you use research to define a strategy. So instead of just making it up, I mean, there's a lot of creativity, of course, in PR and certainly in advertising. But it's always better when it's derived from some sort of research findings. So people use research as a fundamental core to build a strategy. What should we say? What do the consumers want? What are individuals looking for? What are the messages that we should be using in order to transmit all the various assets or attributes of a various brand that we want to do? And that's where research can be valuable. It also is valuable on its own. Many PR agencies use research as a tool to get news, right? It's an easy news hook. 89% of Americans think that they're fat. Okay, that's a great news hook, right? So, so research can itself be the news.
One knock on PR over the years was that it's not data-driven. It's not analysis-driven as much as some other areas of marketing are. You've probably seen that change over the past few years, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are still some people who don't use research nearly enough, and I don't want to dismiss creativity. Creativity is still a critical element towards any good branding and PR campaign. But I have seen a growth of dependence on research where people are trying to maximize the value of their PR or their dollars, right? They're trying to figure out what is the best way to do it. And the truth is that research can help you do that. So it's an expenditure that actually can save you money or at least help with efficiency of communicating a message.
Now, from the outside, it seems like polling and research is one way that the public affairs and the political world is rubbed off on public relations.
For sure.
Where else do you see an overlap, and where else do you see that influence happening?
Well, I think that the truth is that politics is usually the last one to catch up to things, and so in the corporate branding space, research has always been an integral part of everything that's been done for years and years and years, and it took a while for politics to catch up. Now, obviously, politics is so fundamentally built around research because the political world is really trying to maximize those dollars. I mean, the politician knows that they've got to put their advertisement on TV, and they're up against Nike and Reebok and McDonald's, and it's just very hard to compete. I mean, even though we know that there's this massive amount of money being spent on politics, it's nothing compared to what the big brands are doing and what they're with their advertising and even their PR spin machines. So we've seen research as a driving force to try to maximize those dollars for the politicians who know that each dollar they spend is very, very precious.
And of course, we're a month away from the presidential election at this point. And so that being said, polling's been in the news a lot recently. Yeah. A lot of accusations from both sides that the polls are skewed or they're not accurate or whatever the case is. Why is polling a bigger topic in this cycle than it has been in previous
Because
ones?
of the proliferation of polls. And it's been like that. I feel like every 4 years we have a conversation about the proliferation. But at this point, you really can be any Joe Schmo and get a poll done. I mean, you can hire one of these automated polling firms for a couple $100s to run a poll on whatever question you want. And that technology, which is great and wonderful and there's a lot of value to it, also has increased the number of, frankly, bad polls that are out there. And so some of the whining that's going on in terms of polls and how they look is actually quite right. Some of it where they are questioning the way the sample is done. Does this really look like the likely voter electorate? Some of it is right, but more of it right now, particularly the last couple of weeks when you're talking about these skewed polls, for example, has been whining from people who don't like the results. And that was true a number of years ago when John Kerry was behind in the polls and there were Democratic whiners saying, oh no, the polls are all wrong, and today, or the last couple of weeks, there's been a lot of Republican whining. And like I said, there's a kernel of truth to some of it, but in general, the real pollsters, the political pollsters, understand how to create a good sample, a valid sample, and get it right. But some of the polls that are out there in the public domain, including some by the media, are just wrong.
Do you see any change in this trend? It just seems like it's going to proliferate, proliferate, proliferate. What do you think is going to happen?
I think it's going to continue because as polling goes from the traditional telephone polling to automated polling or robo-dialing, which is very cheap, to eventually internet when truly everyone has universal access to the internet. it'll become cheaper and faster and easier to do these things. So I can only see a proliferation, and I don't think that's a good thing. Like, we don't like the fact that campaigns and news coverage is so driven by horse race coverage. But it's also, to some extent, it is what it is. Right. You know, research is information, and people are thirsting for information. Politics is about presenting voters with a choice between two individuals. And in order to give people a choice, you have to give them information. Well, polls and research, it's another piece of information that people are using. We just have to hope that people are using it for the right reason and not sort of to try to bias or try to show something that is truly skewed. Because at the end of the day, none of the pollsters want to present a skewed picture, because then next year when people are looking back, they're going to look and say, well, why did you say that Obama was losing by 20 points? You know, and that at some point in time, that kind of inaccuracy catches up to you. If we did that in our business, we'd eventually get fired.
Sure, sure. Is it fair to say that the public is actually more interested in polls than they have been in past years? I mean, 538 is a tremendously popular site. You know, there are others too. Why is the public more interested in this than they used to be, or so it seems?
So when I first got into the business of polling, I remember there was a joke that, you know, I told my grandmother that I was going to be a pollster, and she's like, "Really, fix furniture? I didn't really know you were that good at that." And I was like, "No, not an upholsterer, a pollster." And the notion that like polling and what it is has become very common. I mean, I can't believe sometimes when I'm talking to friends, and I thank God that most of my friends are not in politics, so we talk about things that aren't, you know, who's up and down in Iowa's 2nd Congressional District, as if most normal human beings care, right? But they are today far more able to talk about Real Clear Politics and Pollster.com and 538 and know about these things. So I think that, yes, there's a thirst for polls, but I also think it's a reflection of the internet age and the way people are getting news, and an ability to get news from so many different sources, and pick your own sources that you think are good and valid and valuable. And polling is just one piece of that. But the great part about all those things, like a 538, like a Real Clear Politics, and like Pollster.com, is that they aggregate all these polls so that if there are anomalous ones, it sort of factors out the noise.
Right.
And I think that provides the reader with tremendous information that is more valuable than anything they've had before.
Jeff, thanks again. Again, this is Jeff Pollock. He is the president of Global Strategies Group. I'm Frank Washkuch, the news editor at PRWeek. Thanks again.